All right. Danny. What's up, Danny?
Talk to me.
All right. Now.
Isrreal. So nice to have you on the podcast. This is the Pacemaker Podcast. This is our third podcast, and I think one of the most important things that we need to get out here is our veterans who have served and given and sacrificed. Lord, we just want to pray for those people right now, Lord. I just ask you that, Lord, you'll open up Isrreal and lift him up, Lord, and fill him with the spirits and help him with his story, Lord God. We just bless this time together. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen.
So Isrreal, talk to me, brother. Let me know. I want to hear your story. Tell me all about your life.
All right. Well, let's see. I was born and raised. I grew up in California, Southern California, in San Pedro. Grew up there until about I was 8 years old, and then moved up north into the Bay Area. We moved up into Sunnyvale, Cupertino area, and I grew up there. And from there, once I was of age and able to join the military, I joined the military and went off to boot camp. But prior to that, it was a rocky road joining. I wasn't able to join right away because a lot of trouble that I got into, a lot of fights. But I knew the Marine Corps was for me.
You like that fighting, huh?
Yeah, I love the fighting.
I understand. I got my mama bought me some of those GI Joes at about 6 years old, and from then on, man, that's all I dreamed about. Soldier.
Yeah, that was it, man. The GI Joe did it for me. Rambo, I
was a little old for Rambo.
The Delta Force, Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone. I grew up watching them, and that was a lot of my motivation to want to join the military. So I actually when I joined, it was a little hard, because of the amount of fights that I had gotten into and the things that I was doing. I grew up in, my mom was single, but, she had a boyfriend, and so I had a man figure in my life. But it was on and off, and then she ended up getting married. When she got married, it was a little bit hard for me, having a stepdad. He was a little abusive at times, so I grew up rebellious, which was pretty much the reason why I went down the path that I did. I had a lot of fighting and stuff like that. I had a lot of anger issues, always drinking, as I got older and into high school, started experimenting pretty much in junior high. And then as I got into high school, it got, a little bit worse, where I was drinking a lot and just, doing a lot of things that I shouldn't have been doing.
Most of us.
Yeah, it's the story of everybody's life, pretty much, growing up. But, I thank God that I went the route that I did because it made me who I am. And I wouldn't be here today talking to you if I went any other route.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. So when I was about... Oh man, I think when we first moved up into Sunnyvale, there was an air station out there, Moffett Airfield, air station. It was an active Navy airfield, and I remember when we got out there, we lived in these apartments, and I would always see the jets flying over. I'd always see the planes and the helicopters, and I just remember one day when I looked up and I could read the actual, Navy on the plane. I knew from that day on that, the military was for me, and that was my calling, So I ended up, I was so interested in it. I liked the shooting. I liked the explosives. I was really into guns and firecrackers and, all that kind of stuff. And, as I got older, I was able to join the military, but I ended up going into the Navy. And when the recruiter had contacted me, I was probably about maybe about 17, early 17. So I'd maybe just turned 17, and the Navy recruiter had contacted me, and I thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, here's my opportunity to be able to join the military. so I talked to the recruiter. He ends up taking me over to Oakland, and that's where I took the ASVAB test and was assigned my MOS. The MOS that I wanted, I barely missed it by 1 point. So I was off by 1 point. I wanted to be a gunner's mate, something that dealt with guns, big guns, whatever. It really, I wasn't too picky. I just wanted something that made a lot of noise and big booms, So I was like, all right, I'll pick a gunner's mate. And I ended up missing it by 1 point, and I was pretty bummed out, So on the way back, I had to take the train all the way from Oakland back to Cupertino, Sunnyvale area, and I was pretty bummed out. And I remember the ride home when I was talking to the recruiter. I was like, man, so how often do you guys go out and shoot? Do you guys go out and shoot, blow things up? Or, I mean, what do I do? And he's like, oh, you're going to be a seaman apprentice. I was like, seaman apprentice? Like, what is that? And he explained it to me, and I was like, that's not what I want to do. So it was, I sat there and I'm like, that's not what I want to do. I'm like, you guys don't shoot enough. You guys I'm not going to be blowing anything up. I'm not going to be shooting anything. I don't want to go just sit on a ship. And so, at the time I was working as a busboy at this little small Italian restaurant, and I had been there for a couple of years, and I was talking to the cook about it, and she had told me that she joined the Army, and without telling her parents. And her parents, once they found out, they were pretty upset, and they told her to get out. And she told me, hey, you know what? All you got to do is just tell the recruiters that you don't want to join, and they'll release you. So it took me a couple of days to build up the courage to sit there and tell the recruiter that I didn't want to join the Navy. So once I did, I made that phone call, called up the recruiters. Man, within 30 minutes, 2 of them were at my door, picking me up, taking me back to the recruiting office, sat in that room with the chief, and they're just drilling me, why don't you want to join? What do you want to do with your life? And they just kept going on and on and on, trying to convince me to stay in. And I just wasn't having it, because it just, for me, joining the Navy and becoming a seaman apprentice just wasn't hard enough for me. It wasn't challenging enough. And so I told him, hey, I want to shoot guns and blow things up, So they're like, okay, so what do you want to do? I was like, I want to join the Marine Corps.
That went over like a pile of poop.
Oh man, I tell you what, they looked at me and they were pretty disgruntled.
Imagine.
They were looking at me like, you got to be kidding me, So they walked me outside. And there was 2 recruiters. It was a sergeant and a corporal, and this was at night. And probably about, if I can remember, I would say about 6, 7 o'clock at night. And I remember the recruiters; they were just outside having a smoke, and I'm sitting there, just standing there, and he's like, "Hey, this guy doesn't want to join the Navy; he wants to join the Marine Corps." And they just stood there for a minute staring at me, and I was speechless. I had no idea what to say. Had absolutely no idea. And they're just staring at me. And they both walk into their recruiting office, and they let their staff NCO IC know. And it was a gunny. I can't remember his name, but he was a scary guy. This guy he'd been around the block a couple times. And he came out, and he's just staring at me. And then he locked my body up, he just started tearing me apart, just yelling and screaming and hollering at the top of his lungs. And I wasn't expecting that, I was expecting for them to just welcome me into the office and, hey, you want to join? All right, come on. But he wasn't having it, so he sat there just tearing me apart. And I'll remember, I remember there's a civilian that was walking on the sidewalk, and this was a busy street. This was this was a busy street. It's out in it's Stevens Creek Boulevard, if anybody's familiar with that. Stevens Creek Boulevard out in Santa Clara, and it's pretty busy. And I'm just standing there in awe while he's tearing me apart. And this civilian walks by, and he stops and he looks at him, and he's like, damn, Gunny, take it easy on the kid. And he just looked at him and started yelling at him. And then he turned around and started yelling at me. And he, at that time it was December, because he told me that if I wanted to join the Marine Corps, that I had to come back after winter break. And I remember it was like, winter break was mid-December sometime. And he's like, if you want to join the Marine Corps, you come back January 3rd, 6 o'clock. He's like, if you're 1 minute late, he's like, you're not joining my corps. So I looked at him and I shook his hand and I said, I'll see you at 6 o'clock on the 3rd of January.
Right
So
on.
I went home, and I tell you what, I was really contemplating, because that chewing that he gave me was a stiff one. I have never been yelled at like that ever, but in my mind I was like telling myself, well, that's what it's going to be like. I knew the drill instructors, and once I got on those yellow footprints, it wasn't going to be anything easy. So I was like, all right, well, that was just a taste of what I'm going to get. So I ended up going home, sitting there, and just really thinking about it. I was scared, I was nervous, but January 3rd came around. I remember hopping on the bus, and I made sure, because I wasn't driving or anything, so I had to take the county transit. So I hop on the bus, and I made sure I was early, had plenty of time. Got there 6 o'clock on the dot. I walked through, and I'll never forget. I opened the door, and the little bells ring, ching, ching, ching. And I look at him, and he's looking at me. And, he had some, he gave a couple choice words, and he looked at his recruiter, and he looks at me, and he's like, boy, you got some balls. And I was like, I want to be a Marine. I said, I told you I was going to be here at 6 o'clock, and I'm here to join, and I want you to know that I'm serious about joining. So he ends up looking at the recruiter. Sergeant Rhodes was my recruiter, and he ends up telling him to sign me up. So we go through all the paperwork and everything, and it took quite a while for me to enlist, because I had a juvenile record. And it was all, and that's how I knew I was, Marine Corps Infantry was all, it was screaming my name, because all I was about was just fighting. So I was like, man, now I can join this organization, go out, get sent out to go fight. And instead of getting arrested, I'm getting awarded. I'm getting awards now. I'm not getting the silver bracelets. So it took me a while, and I remember it took about 9 months or so for me to actually get all the waivers in and everything. Marine Corps headquarters, Marine Corps would get the waiver, and then they'd tell me, or my statements, and then they'd send them back, tell me to put some other stuff in it. And by the time I was able to enlist, it was probably about 9 to 10 months of just straight paperwork that I did. But I had to show that I was for real about joining. So I couldn't be late at any of the meetings that, which was awesome for me, because I needed that direction. I needed somebody there to push me, because if they didn't, then I would have been all over the place. So I ended up going into the delayed entry program, and I think I was in the delayed entry program. I was in the delayed entry program for about 9 months with the Navy. And then shortly after that, I went in. They transferred all the paperwork over to the Marine Corps side, and I was in there for a little bit. But prior to going to boot camp, and this was in 1996 when I joined. So the summer, I joined October 14th, 1996. So the summer prior to that, so the June, July, August timeframe, I wanted to spend one last summer with my friends, which I think was a big mistake to do that. I should have left a lot sooner than October. I should have left as soon as I got out of school, but I was like, it's my last summer. I'm going to go party. I'm going to go hang out. And I ended up getting into trouble, one last time. And, I ended up, we went to a park, and we were sitting there, drinking and doing the things that we shouldn't have. And we end up going to get something to eat, and we run into two guys that called us out. and my boys, I was the smallest one. So if you could picture me, I looked like a little alien, one of the grays. I was so skinny. I had a big head. I weighed about 130 pounds of my senior year. I was 5'10", 130 pounds, so I was scrawny. I was ripped though.
There you go.
I was like Bruce Lee. Yeah. But, so these guys, they end up calling us out, and, being under the influence, we weren't making the choices that we should have. And we got out, we ended up fighting, and we put a good whooping on these guys, and not even realizing, not even thinking about it. It ends up being right across the street from the Sunnyvale Police Department. And once we were done fighting, we find out that they were brothers. They were two brothers, and we get up and we start. They tap out. They call it quits, and then we get up and we start shaking hands. And we're laughing and everything. And we were just about to head out to another park to go drink beers with these guys. And next thing you know, we got cop cars just all around. And mind you, by this time I was already I was looking at about 3.5 to 4 years. I was already on probation for that time. So it was like I was consistent, every 6 months or so I was getting into a fight, and then I'd get probation for another year. And then my probation would be close to ending, and I'd get in another fight. And so my probation never ended. And so this time around, it was a big deal because, my previous record was carrying over to this charge. So I had a charge that they were going to reactivate on me plus an additional. And this one was pretty scary because they were going to charge me with assault with a deadly weapon. And I never used, I to this day, I stand on that. I never, ever used any type of weapon. It was just my hands and my feet. If they wanted to consider my feet a weapon, then okay. But I was the only one out of, I think there was like 4 of us that got, that were arrested, but I was the only one that they charged with that felony. So long story short, my friends end up getting lawyers, and they plea bargained with the DA. They got misdemeanors, but I sat there and I was like, no, I'm not going to plea bargain. I'm not going to plea bargain because I know for a fact, I didn't do it. I didn't use any weapons that they said that I used. So I just, and I didn't have the money to get an attorney or anything like that. So I had to go with the public defender, and he kept insisting, plea bargain. But at that time, because the charge was so severe and because of my previous record, I was facing 4 years, up to 4 years in the CYA, California Youth Authority. So I was pretty scared. I had never spent more than more than a weekend in juvenile hall, and now all of a sudden I'm facing up to 4 years. So I'm facing up to 4 years, and I was so nervous, and I remember the day I had court. The night prior, I just sat there and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and I didn't really grow up in a religious family. I did my first communion and went to church here and there, but I didn't understand the power of prayer. But I knew that I needed a miracle to get me out of the mess that I was in. So I was praying the night before, just that a miracle would happen,
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up going into court with my mom, and as soon as we walked into the lobby, this was a juvenile court. As soon as we walked into the lobby, I saw one of the guys there, and my heart sank. I knew right off the bat, I'm like, that's it. He's going to identify me. And he's going to give his statement, whatever, and I'm done. There's not going to be, there's no chance for me, So he looks at me, I look at him, and I just put my head down, and I sat across from him, just kind of sitting there, still praying under my breath, for a miracle. And I remember my friends going, they talk probably, it was a little while, maybe about 30 minutes to an hour, somewhere in between that time. The district attorney comes out and calls my friends over, and they already plea bargained for misdemeanors, and I'm like, no, I'm not doing that, because either way, if I would have plea bargained, either way I was going to do time. The only way that I wasn't going to do time was if it got dismissed. That was the only way. So I was nervous either way. And they call the brother up, and he goes up, and they're talking for a little while. And I'm watching the DA, it was a female, and I'm watching her expressions, and you could tell that she was getting upset, but I didn't know what she was getting upset over, right? And next thing you know, the brother, he walks past me, and I look up, I had this frown on my face. I was so bummed out, and I just looked at him, and he looks at me and he smiles. He smiles, and I'm thinking, oh man, that could only go one way, that in my eyes, I'm done, because he's looking at me. I figured he was smiling at me because he's like, I got you, but the DA ends up calling my name. She's like, Isrreal. I'm like, yes, I am. I walk up to her with my mom. I'm like, yes, ma'am. And she's looking at me because I know she wanted to hammer me. I know, like I could just see it in her. And she looks at me. She's like, you can go home. And I was like, excuse me? She's like, you can go home now. And I was like, I can go home? Like, are you, well, am I hearing
no
this?
way.
Yeah. I'm like, there's no way. Like, how are you saying I can go home? I'm like, I was facing so much time, and like, what do you mean I can go home? She's like, the witness couldn't identify you, so there's no witness, so we can't move. We can't prosecute. And at that time, by the time I everything processed in my mind, I look over, and the guy was already gone, so I couldn't go and thank him. He had already left, and that was it. But I'll never forget that smile that he had on his face. I think, it was just,
I bet you won't.
Oh, I still to this
Redemption.
day. Oh yeah. But if I could ever meet that guy again, I tell you, if it wasn't for him during that time, I wouldn't have been able to join the military, because I would have had another felony, and that would have disqualified me from being able to join any branch of service. For that would have been it, So I thank that guy just 1,000 times over for not identifying me. And I know he did, because that smile on his face just said
he told
everything. He told me, I know what
he was letting you know he's giving you the love. He's doing you a favor.
Yeah.
And he did. That's a huge one.
Oh man.
It sets you right for your life, man.
Yeah, he did.
Wow.
He did. So at that time, my mom was like, that's it. She drove me over to the recruiting office. She's like, I want him gone as soon as possible. She wasn't having it. And I thank my mom. At the time, I didn't understand. I still wanted to stay home because I was nervous to go off to boot camp. But I knew that if I didn't go on the next opening, that I probably would get in trouble again. I was just so hard-headed, and I just I just didn't listen. And I know I knew at that time I needed direction. And so we went down to that recruiting office, and they're like, hey, we can get you out in 2 weeks. So I was put me on that plane. I said, 2 weeks, I'm out. So so I ended up it was October 14th, 1996 was when I joined. and they put me on that plane, sent me off to boot camp, and that was the start of my life right there.
So one thing I noticed is throughout the years is that the military become a much harder to join in the 90s and now. When I went in the Army in 1973, my cousin and I decided we're going to go on a buddy plan because this 6'9" state policeman, Michigan state policeman, said, if you don't go in the military, I got another place I'm going to put you. And I really took him serious because he had us and couldn't prove it, but he had us, and we had done a bunch of bad stuff. Stole a bunch of motorcycles, and 3 of us. And we were just looking for a way out of it, and he was on our trail. And he told me, he said, you better go join. So I told my cousin, I said, man, we better go do something. He's going to get us. So we went over and we went to Detroit. We took the Army test. He flunked. Couldn't even pass it. He got a 68. I'm like, oh man, come on. I don't want to go by myself. So he said, let's go to the Navy. So we go over to the Navy recruiter. He takes the test and fails again. No, first it was the Air Force. He failed. Then we went to the Navy. He failed that test. So then we went to the Army, and of course they said, you don't even need to take the test. You can go. Well, we did take the test, but it didn't matter what he scored, and he flunked again. But we were at Fort Knox, Kentucky, about midnight that night from Detroit. That's how quick they snatched us up, and we were in basic training. But a lot of different times. Much has changed.
Look at
Oh yeah! Look at that, Bob.
Yeah,
Just
AT4.
I see that big smile. How many of those have you fired?
Man, I wasn't with the AT4s when I was an instructor. Well, I'll go back. So when I joined back in '96, I end up signing up for the infantry. I had different options, but I didn't want anything other than the Marine Corps infantry because like I said, I just love the hooking and jabbing, the fighting, the grunt work, and I really needed that challenge in my life at that time because I needed direction. I needed that challenge.
Discipline.
The discipline. So I just kept telling them, hey, I want to go to the Marine Corps infantry. And I'll never, I was nervous. Like I said, I was skinny. I was just a troublemaker, and hearing the stories about going into boot camp was just terrifying enough. Once I went into boot camp, that was for me, it was the best experience ever. That's where I actually put on some weight, put on like 20 pounds. I got my discipline, and even when we were in boot camp, we had the opportunity. They would team us up or pair us up, and we would have to go in and fight each other. With some boxing gloves, pugil sticks. Some type of combat contact. And I remember when we had one. It was the boxing, and I used to box too. I grew up for probably about a year and a half. I was boxing prior to joining the military. And I remember, I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell any of the drill instructors. So they put me in with a couple of guys, and I just went in there and whooped on them, knocked them out, and ended up winning a free phone call, with the drill instructor. He was loving it. So they kept putting me back in there, just beat all the kids they didn't like. They're like, just kept putting me in there, beating them up. So I'm like, man, this is awesome, here.
and they like it.
Yeah, I'm like, here they are. They're rooting for me, and I'm over here beating up all the people they don't like, and all the recruits that they didn't like, I'm getting a free phone call. It was everything that I wanted, Again, I wasn't getting those silver bracelets slapped on my wrists. Here I am getting free phone calls at the time, because at the time they only gave you one phone call a month. So you could only, call whoever, and it was a 10-minute phone call, and it definitely wasn't long enough. By the time you got a hold of somebody, you had like 2 minutes, and then when you got to speak to somebody, your voice was so hoarse that you couldn't even talk. You'd lose your voice, So to be able to win a phone call was like, that was like gold. That was like a gold nugget, digging and finding treasure, It was that type of experience, So ended up getting some phone calls, and then I did really well in boot camp, and then I graduated. And once I graduated from there, I ended up going, I went home, visited my friends and everything, and they saw the transformation. That was the best part, because I wanted to show them that I was a new person, and the transformation in me alone was so big, because I went from just being a troubled youth to a disciplined Marine, just like that in 3 months, and I was so proud of myself that I was able to accomplish something like that, because I've never been tested like that before. And I went through, completed boot camp, came out, and then, everybody was giving me praise, and I've never, all that praise and everything for me completing boot camp and looking the way that I did in my uniform. I was sharper than a razor, all proud of a boot walking around in my uniform at school. But it was the greatest feeling, because, it was like, I was like an eye magnet. Everybody was looking at me, and then, it was so awesome especially with the teachers that were in my life. I'm a firm believer now that I look back that God had me in the palm of his hand, and he surrounded me with the people that he did, because if I wasn't put in these like special programs, I would have never graduated high school, and I would have never had the opportunity to join the Marine Corps. So once I graduated, I went back, and I was part of this program for the troubled kids who needed help to graduate high school, and I fit right in there like a glove. I was one of those. And so one of the teachers, Miss Neva, she had asked me if I could go in and speak to her class, all the troubled youth, and to try to lift them up, kind of like a motivational speaker. And I jumped on that, like white on rice. I was like, yeah, I'll go in there, I'll do it. So I went in there, and I talked to her class. I told them, my background about how I used to get in trouble, how I used to drink, I used to do all kinds of things. But then because of that program, that it helped me, it enabled me to graduate and to join the Marine Corps. And it basically made a new me, and that there was hope for them. Regardless of what they were feeling, what they were going through, that there was still hope for them to graduate high school and to make something of themselves. So, I had that opportunity to be able to talk to them, lift them up a little. They had tons of questions, especially about boot camp and everything like that. I had never been put into a position like that to actually motivate others. I always felt like I was just at the bottom of the barrel. Nobody cared, nothing like that. Never in a million years did I ever think that I would actually be there talking to somebody or to a class or to an audience, trying to motivate them and lift them up. So it was everything that the Marine Corps began to instill in me. And I tell you, I can't take that back for anything. I'll never take it back.
Never.
Ever. So from there, I ended up. I tell you, I was blessed. My first. Don't hate on me for this one, but my first duty station was in Hawaii. So,
that's not fair. I still want to go. Never been there.
Yeah.
Never been there.
So a lot of people tell me that, and that when I got my orders, I was just, I ended up after boot camp, I ended up going to SOI, the School of Infantry West Coast. So I was out in Camp Pendleton. And that's where I became, it was cool because that's where I actually got my MOS. So it was, I went infantry, and then within the infantry, there was a bunch of different MOSs that you can choose within the infantry. So the one that caught my eye was the 0351s, which is anti-tank assaultmen, and they were the ones that dealt with demolitions. So it was just all
got your way.
Oh, I got my way. Oh man, so that right there was like, that was my dream job. Going out, dealing with the AT-4s and the SMAs, the shoulder-fired multi-purpose assault weapons, firing 83 millimeter rockets, and also dealing with demolitions. So, a lot of C4, TNT, deck cord, blasting caps. I mean, you name it, shock tube.
Phosphorus grenades.
It was everything that, it was everything that and more that I could ask for. So I remember we had our dream sheet, and we had to put down, five MOSs, and one being the one that you wanted the most, all the way to the least. And I put 0351 for all 5 of them, just bam, all the way down.
All the way
I was
down.
like, yeah, I didn't want anything else. I was like, this is it. This is exactly what I was looking for. So I ended up getting the 0351 MOS. And man, I tell you, it was like I was like a kid in a candy store. Just I had the smile on my face. I was just motivated to learn about the demo, run around shooting all the guns, and then shooting the rockets. It was just an amazing experience to have, to be able to do something like that. And once I graduated, that's when I received my orders to Hawaii. So it was in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And man, I tell you, my family was pretty jealous. They were, when I told them I got orders to the Marine Corps, they were like, "What? No way!" Or orders to Hawaii. They were amazed, but they were happy for me that I was able to get something like that. Boy, I tell you, it was the greatest experience to be able to go, because I always wanted to go on vacation, but now here I am living there,
Yeah.
so I had the opportunity to live there and experience just that whole entire island. I was on Oahu in Kaneohe Bay, so I ended up getting my orders to 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, Alpha Company, Weapons Platoon was where I served for my first 4 years. And it was the most amazing experience to be on that island, to see the locals, to train on there, to train in the jungle. It was an awesome experience, so.
Right on.
Yeah. So right after that, right after my first 4 years, I ended up actually getting out. So I kind of hung up the hat on the Marine Corps. The infantry it beat me up pretty, all the hikes that we had and everything like that. It was so much on my body. It was so much on me that I wanted to hang it up, and that was it. So, and I wanted to see what I could offer the civilian life, in the civilian world. I wanted to see what all my experiences in the Marine Corps would bring me, and where it would lead me in the civilian world. So in 2000, I ended up getting out, October 2000. And I got out, started working, and I ended up getting a job. And one of the things was, it's funny because when I was in the Marine Corps, I was like, okay, I want an admin job, because I was so tired of being in the field. After a while, it was fun at first, but then just like anything else, you get tired of it. So I sat there and I was like, I want an admin job, somewhere that I could sit in an office. It's nice and cozy, AC when it's hot, turn the heater on when it's cold, and just do paperwork, And so I get out and I start looking for a job, and I find a job. And so it was in East Palo Alto. I ended up going back to the Bay Area, back to San Jose, and I find a job in East Palo Alto, and I'm working at this job for probably about 3-4 months, and it just I just wasn't feeling it. I was doing really good in the job, and they loved me in that job, but my heart was still with the Marine Corps. I just wasn't satisfied working as a civilian. So one day, just out of the blue, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go back, and I'm gonna go back in. I'm like, I'm gonna go back in. So I went back to the recruiting office, the same one I was recruited out of the first time. I went back over there and talked to the recruiters, and it was Sergeant Milburn, who was the recruiter this time. And I talked to him, and he was in civilian clothes and everything. And I'm like, yeah, I walked in a little cocky, because I ended up getting out as a corporal. And so I was a little cocky, yeah, I want to join back, and not realizing that who I was talking to. And this guy, once I, found out who he was, man, he was some force recon bubba he was just stacked. This guy was just stacked with medals. And I was like, whoa, man, like I didn't realize who I was talking to, because you see somebody like that that's got a bunch of medals and ribbons and everything, they've been around the block a couple times um, because it's really hard to get anything in the Marine Corps. It's to get recognized for any medal, any ribbon, or anything like that. It's really hard, especially if they're personal ones. So when I saw him, my jaw hit the ground, because this guy had every medal that I could imagine. And at that time, I was like, okay, I better just let me get off my horse here and let him ride it. Let him ride that horse, And so it took me about, by the time I enlisted again, it was hard, because this was March of 2001. So when I decided to go back to the recruiting office and re-enlist, and at the time it was really hard to come back, because they considered me what's called a retread, somebody who gets out and tries to come back in. So when you do that, the headquarters Marine Corps takes a look at your service record book to see your performance. And before I got out, I made sure that I was good with everything. So my physical fitness tests were high, my rifle scores were high. Everything that I needed to put a check in the box was there was a check in that box. And so I wanted to finish strong and finish as a professional, the way I was taught. So but every month they only had one quota for a whole entire region. So it was like, I don't know how many recruiting offices there were, but they could only take one for, I'm gonna say about 5 or 6 recruiting stations that could only accept one prior service. And so every month I was getting beat out. Somebody else, boom, they'd always take the best one. And then finally the third month I got accepted back in, right? But this is crazy, because when I went and I told the recruiter, and they're like, okay, what do you want to do? And I'm like, anything but the infantry. I'm like, put me down as a bulk fuel, air condition repairman, admin. I said everything but the infantry, because it had already broke my body, broke my mind. I was so tired of sleeping in the wet and mud and dealing with the jungles and just things like that I was like, I want a good, something a little bit easier. And by the time I ordered, they came back and they're like, hey, you got approved. And I was like, yeah, what job did I get? What's my MOS? And they're like, the only way you could come back in is as an instructor for the School of Infantry. And I was sitting there, and I remember I'm like, no. So you're telling me I got to go back to the infantry? And they're like, yep, that's the only way. It's the Marine Corps needs. It's like, if you want, you can come back in, but that's where you're going. And I sat there and I was like, oh man, I'm like, as an instructor, I'm like, man, I can't even get up. I used to cut class whenever I had a report to give or a presentation, because I was so nervous I couldn't get up and speak. So I was like, how am I going to go out there and be an instructor and try to teach people when I couldn't even get up in front of a class in high school and give a speech or anything? I'm like, and plus it was, again, once I finished that one, there I go, I'm stuck in the infantry. So, I ended up agreeing and joining, re-enlisting and joining back in as an instructor. And so I thought it was pretty cool too, because my friends, I had a bunch of friends that actually stayed back in. They stayed in and they re-enlisted, and they all went to the School of Infantry on the West Coast. And so I thought it was cool, because I was able to reconnect with all my old buddies. So
it's cool.
Yeah. So it was awesome. I called them up and I'm like, hey man, I'm coming back. So that we were all excited to rejoin and to see each other again. And I get my orders, and I stayed on recruiting for about 6 months. So I stayed on recruiting as a recruiter's assistant, a recruiter's aide, for 6 months before I got my orders to SOI. And during that time, I'd go to schools and be, talking to the students and trying to get people in. And it was cool because it gave me the opportunity to go out and try something different and to kind of boost me up a little, get used to talking to people and putting myself in situations that made me uncomfortable like that. And so I was doing that for 6 months, and I was still a corporal, and I had lost half my time in grade. So I was a corporal for, I think, 17 months when I got out, and then they took half of that and gave me 8 months time in grade, which means it makes me eligible for promotions. So during those 6 months, I got about 10 new recruits, 10 poolees to enlist, and then because I did that, I ended up getting they raised my cutting score, and I ended up getting promoted to sergeant while I was on recruiting, which was awesome, because to go down, I didn't want to go down as an instructor to the School of Infantry as a corporal, because then I'd be on the bottom of the totem pole. So when they made me a sergeant, when I got promoted to a sergeant, it was like it lifted me up even more, and I knew that that's where I wanted to be at, and so I get promoted, I get my orders, and I end up doing a self move. So I drive all the way down to Camp Pendleton from San Jose. So it was about a 6-hour drive south, 6 to 8 hours south. And so I drove by myself. First time I ever drove anywhere that far. I'm sitting here, I got my orders, I'm scared, I don't know what to do. Hop in my car, and of course, I'm still praying at the time, for guidance. And I get down there and I check in, and the day that I checked into the School of Infantry was September 11th, 2001, when the World Trade Centers got hit. So that was a day that I'll never forget. There's days that go by, and there's days that will be with you forever.
I think in America, all of us are going to remember what we were doing on 9/11.
Oh yeah,
I do.
Yeah,
it wasn't good. I wasn't being good. Yeah. And I was up all night.
Oh man, yeah,
working hard for corruption. Okay,
that's I God
remember is
that.
amazing.
Oh man, yeah, it was. It was a scary day. I remember when the duty, we had the duty. I put in a wake up call. The duty came over and he woke me up. He woke me up late, as a matter of fact, and he was like, "Hey man, you got to watch the news. The World Trade Centers just got hit." I wasn't thinking anything too big about it. I thought maybe, whatever, because they've obviously attacked the World Trade Centers before in the past. So it wasn't, to me, I wasn't really thinking about the severity of it. And, once I saw it on the news, I was watching where the first plane hit. And then when we were watching the news, here comes the second plane, hits, and then all of a sudden they put the base on lockdown. They start putting Marines they started, like, all the roads and everything. They had checkpoints, and it was horrible, because when I checked in, I was in my alphas, my service alphas. So here I am, it's boiling hot out there. I'm in my alphas. I've got all my personal belongings stuffed in. I had a little Mitsubishi Eclipse, so I had all my belongings stuffed in the vehicle, and I'm driving, and man, I tell you, it felt like every 100 yards I was hitting a checkpoint. Get out, they'd go through all my stuff, put it back in, drive another 100 yards, Wow. So it was rough. And and I remember all the Marines, they're like, "Yeah, what a time to check in, Sergeant." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, tell me about it." Right. And so eventually, once I hit a few checkpoints, they just kind of let me go through without pulling all my stuff out and making me dump everything and going through all my belongings. And I eventually made it to the School of Infantry, and I checked in, and that's pretty much where I started as an instructor there. And again, it's a blessing in disguise. When I got there, they ended up putting me as an instructor for the 0351 anti-tank assaultments, my MOS. So I'm like, wow, here's another opportunity, another great opportunity at first where, that was what I wanted to become because of all the demolitions and everything. And now I'm coming back as an instructor to teach all the junior Marines about explosives and anti-tank rockets and tanks, and demolitions. And I was like, wow, this has got to be like, this is awesome. I couldn't ask for more, to have that opportunity to be able to sit there and, now I'm teaching, so I sat there and I was in the instructor group where I was a podium instructor. I was a podium instructor for probably about 8 months, but prior to that, when I first got there, for about a month or so, there was a transition in the curriculum, and they were changing the course of the what the students were going through. So I had about a month to basically train myself and get up to par with all the curriculum and everything like that. And I remember, I didn't grow up really religious, I wasn't going to church all the time, but my aunt was always teaching me about Jesus Christ, and she always told me that when you feel nervous, when you feel, you feel scared or whatever, she's like, pray, just pray. So I remember, praying for guidance because, and knowledge, because I could never get in front of anybody to speak. I would always get nervous and stumble on my words or something, and now here I am having to teach, and get in front of students. And as a sergeant, you have these new Marines or privates, lance corporals here and there. And I had to sit there and swallow that fear and, basically just stand up there with confidence to teach these Marines because, they'll eat you. They're like sharks, they smell blood. They're going to eat you, and the last thing I wanted to go up there and do was embarrass myself, as an instructor, as a sergeant. And then they're like, oh, discredit myself and the things that I'm teaching. So I sat there and I would pray, for the knowledge. And not realizing that I was being guided, I started to get, these ideas about how to better myself as an instructor. And I would go in, every night, I would go in to the classroom and I would put up the slides and I would teach myself. And I would go through every single bullet of the PowerPoint, every bullet, like I was teaching a class full of students. And I did it every night for the entire month on all the curriculum.
It's got to help, though. When you're preparing yourself like that, you're getting your ducks in a row. It just makes it easier for you when you do present it, though.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. And, I didn't know anything else. I figured I've got to sit here and train myself, what I'm going to say, how I'm going to say it. And so I did that for a month straight, just teaching myself every night. And I'd be in the classroom by myself, talking to myself, teaching. And then come time for the class, we had a class, and it was it happens to be the largest class for the 0351s. Usually the classes were about 10 to 15 students. Well, this one had 33 students in it. So I was so nervous. And of course, I was the first period of instruction for that new curriculum and that big class. And I remember just standing there getting ready to teach, and I look up and I see all these eyeballs on me. And in the back of the class was my entire chain of command, all the officers, all the staff NCOs, and I'm
Pressure's
standing,
on, baby.
Oh my gosh! I'm looking. It's just telling the story. I'm starting to get the jitters. I mean, that's how bad it was.
You didn't know that was going to happen.
I had no idea. I look up, and then I had to watch how I spoke. I had no cussing, no nothing like that, and I'm like, oh man, this is gonna be hard, and then everything had to be on time, so I had to follow it was a strict timeline. And so I was sitting there and I'm like, okay, here I go, so I started teaching, and then all of a sudden it was like I was singing like a bird, it came out, and I just started teaching everything, and all the questions that were being asked. So I was really nervous how I was gonna answer those questions that were gonna be asked, if I was gonna get caught off guard and maybe get asked something that I didn't have the answer to. But everything that was asked, I had an answer to. I stayed up there and I spoke, clearly, and everybody understood, which, thank God. And at the end of my class, I ended up, putting the students on break, and then all the instructors in the back, the chain of command, they all came up, they all shook my hand and told me good job, and it was just that sense of relief. Was just like, wow, man. I went from cutting class during presentations because I was so nervous to teaching such a big class and having that pressure on me that I did good.
So you're saying what doesn't challenge you won't change you?
Oh, man. No, it does. It does, and so, I taught for a while. I really, really enjoyed. At that time, I started feeling more confident about myself and my abilities to teach other people, and I loved it. I love the fact that I was able to be in that position, in that billet. And my buddies, it was kind of split because they had with the SOI, the School of Infantry, you had the Marine Combat, the MCT. Marine Combat Training, and then you had the other side, which was the Infantry Training Battalion. So the Marine Corps Combat Training was basically all your non-infantry guys, and then the Infantry Training Battalion was all your infantry guys. And so I was within that organization. I was in the instructor group, which all I was responsible for was classroom teaching. So I only spoke to the students for during the day, taught just basically like a regular teacher. I would teach during the day. In the afternoon, they went back with their instructors, with the company instructors, and they would go back, and then the company instructors would take them and do their nightly routines or whatever, and finish up, and then I would go home. But after a little while, I was like, man, you know what? I want more hands-on. I want to be in the trenches with the students, running around, going to the ranges, shooting the guns, taking them here, taking them there. I said I wanted to be in front of them more. I was hungry for that. And I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that came from, but I was hungry. And so the opportunity came where there was an opening in Charlie Company. One of the instructors was rotating out, and there was an opening, and I had a few friends in there, and they all put in, a good word for me. And I ended up going from the instructor group over into the company, into Charlie Company. And there, that's where I really kicked off. And the class sizes went from, we're looking at, for me, what I was used to was anywhere from 10 to 15 Marines. And then now I'm in front of anywhere from 150 to 300 Marines in the company, and so it was a big boost, in confidence for myself, to be able to stand in front of so many Marines and teach them, guide them, to drill them, that was fun when we would go out and march, and I was the only one. I'd be calling cadence for a class of 300 Marines at the top, screaming, yelling at the top of my lungs, and just, I'd never thought in a million years that that I would be in that type of position to be able to control that many Marines, so I sat there and I did 8.5 cycles, and each cycle was 2.5 months. So I did 8.5 cycles, and then on the last cycle they sat me out so that I can start to transition before I got orders to my next unit. So I had a great, I think out of all the units that I served in, SOI was the best unit for me. Just boosting confidence and just all the Marines that I got to meet during that time. It was thousands of Marines that would come through. And then as soon as I got orders to another unit, I knew that some of those students I would come across again, in the units, because we just sent them out to all the Marine Corps infantry units, so.
Kind of like you and Mike. Here he is. Here's your instructor, Mike. Let's have a podcast with your instructor. Oh, you didn't know? No, it's pretty amazing. What a small world we live in, and how God puts us together for the better, for the good. And I think this is all for the good. What we're talking about right now is so impacted in so many lives. Veterans need a break, man. I think we need to stand up for the VA. Not just 44,000 sleeping in the streets breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Breaks my heart.
I don't think there should be, anybody, any vet, shouldn't be on the streets. It doesn't matter.
Richest nation in the world, the nation that people have served, and a country that defends other borders, that dispenses our lives of our children in uniform.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we better take care of them. I think it's a poor excuse to not take care of them.
I agree.
I think we have the money, we have the means. Why aren't we doing it? It breaks my heart. So we want to talk about this, and but not at this moment right now, because I'm so into what you're doing, what you have to say here, that we'll bring that topic up another time.
For sure.
That's sure.
That one's a good topic, So definitely have a lot to say on that, about that situation and everything, Yeah. So, but I'll go back and right after in March of 2003, I was getting close to hitting my 3 years at the School of Infantry. I got there. I actually left in August of 2004. I left in there, and I checked into my next unit. But during that time, it was when the war had kicked off in 2003 in March, and I had a bunch of buddies that had they were just getting out of the instructor billet and moving out to the Victor units, which were the deploying units for Iraq. And then on top of that, I took my job very serious, because a lot, if I didn't train the Marines and get them up to par within their job skill, it could cost them their lives, and it could cost other people their lives. So I was like a pit bull, I didn't ease up, not one bit, and it was all for a good cause, So I was pretty aggressive, because I knew the enemy would be more aggressive. And so if I eased up on them and I cuddled them, I knew that it would just set them up for failure, in the future. So I was very, very rough on my Marines, very tough on them, and I held them to like the highest standards. And it was recognized. I ended up, not to toot my own horn, but I ended up getting instructor of the cycle for 3 cycles in a row. So it was
awesome.
Good
job.
And again, here again, that's another, another blessing, in disguise, because again, like I said, I didn't have that ability to stand up in front of people. And here I am getting instructor. I never thought in a million years that I would get instructor of the cycle, and then 3 consecutive times, and then receiving a personal award for that. So once I left the School of Infantry, I left with 2 personal awards, 2 medals, and then 1 meritorious mast that they had given me.
Awesome.
And
good job.
Thank you. And I was just so I really cared about what I was doing for the Marines, and a lot of the Marines, once they left, they would go straight to the Victor units, to the deploying units, and a lot of them were sent to the initial invasion of Iraq, and they would come back and they would thank me. And I think that was the biggest thing, having those Marines come back and thank me for what I did to them, and how I taught them and instructed them and how I led them, never to quit, and always to sit there and just put your head down and keep charging like a bull. Regardless of however you feel, you just put your head down, you keep charging. And they took those traits and they implemented them in their fighting. And a lot of them, they came back and they would tell me, how much they appreciated it. And, that they would tell me their stories about all the engagements and things like that, and as an instructor, I was like, man, I got to get out of here. I got to join these guys. I got to get on the front line with these guys. So, at the time, what they did was they had locked down the MOSs. So, you couldn't get any orders. Nobody could get orders to transfer out until they lifted the lock. So I was stuck until August of 2004. And in August 2004, finally was when they lifted it up, and I could finally get orders. So for me, being as motivated as I was, loving to hook and jab and fight, I put my hand up in the air and I was like, hey, I want orders to the next deploying unit. So they ended up giving me orders to the next deploying unit. So I went to 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, 1st Marine Division, Charlie Company. And I was sitting there. I went to weapons platoon, and I was a sergeant for 0351s there. Only had a few guys under me, but it was okay, So I went there, and they ended up. I don't know if anybody would understand, but they actually took our weapons platoon and made it into like a 0311, just a basic infantry platoon. So we weren't specializing really in our MOS. We were just basic infantrymen. So that way, more boots on the ground, more patrols out. And so I ended up staying there. Man, I did 4 years in that unit, and I deployed. The first deployment was in 2000, and it was actually in December of 2004. We attached to the 15th MEU. And we went in, and this is where, my stories start really with Iraq, So we didn't go in until maybe about 2 or 3 months. I was attached to a MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, so we were on ship for a lot of the times, hitting different ports and everything. And then finally we went into Iraq. We were in Babil. That was the first time that we had gone into Iraq, and we were at Fob Falcon. And we were there for probably about 5 weeks or so. We didn't really get any contact. It was a lot of indirect fire into the camp, and it'll gives you that little pucker factor, when you got things just coming in out of the air, out of nowhere, and all of a sudden exploding. It really makes you think about things, because if it's your time, it's your time, and so. We would go out on patrols. We didn't get in any firefights or any engagements, at least not my unit. Other units did. They would get hit with IEDs. They would get hit with, small arms fire or something like that. But me personally, I never experienced that on that deployment. That was a 6-month deployment. Ended up coming back in 2005. And then, I'm not sure how long we were back. We were back, I think, maybe about 7 months or so before the next deployment. So, the rotations were, 7 months on deployment, 7 months back, 7 months on deployment because of the war. And the 7 months after, we were back, it was you were back, but you weren't back, and I had my family. I was married. I was married for maybe about 2 years or so, 2-3 years. I had 2 kids at that time, and so hitting these deployments was pretty hard, especially when you're going into a war zone. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You don't know if you're going to come back or what's going to happen to you. And so we ended up going on a deployment, and this time we're deploying to Fallujah. So we go, and this was in, I believe, 2005 was when we went, towards the end of 2005. I believe that's when it was that we deployed to Camp Fallujah. And I had just picked up staff NCO, so my billet was only for a sergeant, it wasn't for a staff sergeant. So they needed to put me somewhere because I was, I wasn't the correct rank. So they end up sending me to what's called a MIT team, where I had the opportunity to go out and train the Iraqi police and the Iraqi army, small units. They would come through this course, and so we trained them basically on the fundamentals of marksmanship on Camp Habaniya. And so I sat there for, they call it's messed up, but I didn't go out on any patrols. I sat on the fob, and that's all I did was I just trained these Iraqis basically how to shoot and how to maneuver, so that way they could go out and start transitioning and taking over for the U.S. forces, so that we could start pulling back and withdrawing our forces, and then their forces could start taking over. So it was an important task. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to be with my friends out there running patrols, doing things like that, but I know God had a different plan for me. There was plenty of opportunities that, I sat there, and I remember telling the warrant officer I didn't want to be there. That's not why I wanted to deploy. I wanted to deploy because I wanted to go out and fight. And I remember he was like, he was pretty upset at me at first because he didn't want to send me back, but he was like, if I send you back, there's going to be repercussions. And I'm like, that's fine. I don't care. This isn't what if it ends my career, then it ends my career, but at least I had the opportunity to go out and do what I chose, as what I signed up to do, And so, he sends an email out, and about 2-3 weeks later, I'm still asking, hey, am I going back to my unit? Am I going back to my unit? And then, at that time, I kind of, I started getting used to where I was at, and I was like, you know what, maybe this is where I'm supposed to be at. So I was starting to have second doubts, and going back to my unit and doing everything, and just sticking with where I was at. And he's like, well, do you want to go or do you want to stay? And I was like, well, I'll stay. He's like, okay, you're lucky because all the emails that I've been sending, they've been coming back as non-delivered. So we never got in contact with the regimental commander, so you're not going to go anywhere. So I was like, oh man, I'm like, wow, okay, all right. I said, that's fine. I'm good with that. So again, I was being guided, but I didn't know I was being guided, so I was there for several months. And within a few months, you start getting bored. It's just the same thing over and over, and teaching a class, go out, shoot the ranges, come back, teach a class. And it was just like a broken record. It was like just constantly the same thing.
Groundhog Day.
Yep, all over again, And so I was like, man, I want to do something different. So I asked him again, hey, can I get back to my unit so I can run, at least a few patrols before we, the end of the deployment. So they finally had a replacement for me, and he was supposed to come over and replace me. But then, as he was going to come over, his wife ended up getting sick, and he had to go home on emergency leave. So my replacement ends up going home on emergency leave, and I end up staying still with that unit. So I was like, wow, okay. I'm like, I guess this is where I'm supposed to be at. This is the second time something like this pops up, and I'm like, all right, I'll just stick it out into the rest of the deployment, and I'll do whatever I have to do, until I go back. So I end up going back to my unit at the very end. I reconnect with my unit, and I was there, maybe like a week or so before we started packing up our stuff and heading back to stateside. And, once we got back to stateside, I was like, all right, man, so that's it. I did my 2 deployments with the unit. So it usually worked where you do 2 deployments or 3 years. And then you can get orders and rotate out. So I did my 2 deployments and I hit my 3 years. So I'm like, oh yeah, for sure, I'm out, and I was excited. I'm like, all right, this is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to get back. I'm going to go back and talk to the monitor, get my orders, go do something fun, go hang out for a little while, be with my family. Because at the time when I left, my son was like seven years old. And then I had my newborn. He was only really my first deployment. He was 4 months old, came back. He was a year old, left, came back. He was like a year and a half. So I missed out like a lot on his, little toddler infant days. And it got to me after a while. So, I ended up, I wanted to get orders to somewhere that I knew I would be home every day to spend time with my wife, to spend time with my children and make up for all that lost time. And I remember I walked in, but I tell you what, man, I walked into the monitor, and at this time I was a staff sergeant, and I walked in and I'm like, hey, I'd like to get orders, to something. And he's looking at me, and he was mean. It was funny because everybody would walk in and they'd walk out just pissed off because he would deny them orders and give them orders somewhere they didn't want to go. So I was like, it was kind of like walking the, it was not cool. Like you're walking the gauntlet, you're walking in and nothing's going to come out good. So I walk in and I remember telling them, hey, yeah, can I get orders over here? I did my 2 years. Or my 3 years and 2 deployments, and he looks at me, he's like, you got broken time? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, well, congratulations. And I'm like, okay. He's like, you got another deployment. And I was sat there and I was like,
congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He didn't sugarcoat it or anything.
Not a bit.
Not one bit.
That's the Marines, ain't it?
It was.
It ain't no game.
Yeah, I didn't like that part.
No.
I didn't like that part at all. And I looked at him and I was like, are you serious? And I did everything I could to just try to convince him, like, hey man, come on. I did 2 deployments and I did 3 years with this unit. I'm like, well, how are you gonna keep me with this unit? He's like, he gives me his card. His name was Master Gunny Knox. He gives me his card and he's like, you hit me up when you get back off your 3rd deployment. And I remember looking at the card and I looked at him and I was like, man, that's if I make it back. I was like, that's if I make it back. And I just walked out and I was so bummed out because I didn't know how to tell my wife. My wife was expecting me to get orders to a non-deploying unit for at least 3 years. And that was probably like one of the hardest things to go and tell her, like, hey, Mama, they gave me orders, or they didn't give me orders. I'm going on another deployment. And that just broke her heart. It was just, she was just, she wasn't for it, but she stuck with it. She knew that when we got married, that's what I was about. So she supported me with it, and she backed me up and stayed supportive the whole entire time. And so I went and I did all that training. I did a workup, and then at that time, because I was a staff sergeant, they ended up putting me as the platoon sergeant. So I was in the, it was still with Charlie Company, but now I was the platoon sergeant for 4th Platoon. So now I have, I went from being the squad leader to, going on one of these MIT teams to coming back and actually being the platoon sergeant in charge of, I think we had about 30 to 35 Marines, under my charge, So I was excited because I like, at that time I like to be in the front. I like to lead, I always felt like a leader. And so we did our workup and we end up going on deployment, and we go right back to the same camp, Camp Habania, It's right there, right outside Fallujah. It was kind of it was a triangle of death. I forgot what the third triangle, like part of the triangle, but it was right in the middle of Ramadi and Fallujah. So Camp Habbaniyah just sat right there in the middle, and we were right in the middle of the triangle of death, where it was called the triangle of death for the U.S. forces because that's where a lot of the casualties were happening. And so we ended up going back over there, and probably we did a little while, a couple weeks in Kuwait before we moved up north into Iraq, and then we moved into Iraq, and then it took a little bit, maybe a couple of weeks before we actually started patrolling on our own. And it was like a left seat, right seat. So the unit that was transitioning out, ready to come back to the States, we would ride with them so that they could teach us everything that was going on about the basically all like the area, because they knew the area better. So they would they would tell us the things that they learned over the course of the 7-month deployment, and we would take it and we would sit there, and that's how we conducted our training. And then when we went out, we knew exactly what to look for. It was TTPs. Basically, they passed on all the information that they had gathered to us. And so probably within 2 weeks, we started on our own. They ended up leaving, and we started conducting patrols out, and it usually took about 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I mean, it was for the enemy to sit there and observe and figure out exactly how you move, exactly how you conduct your operations, and they would see, okay, they would put things out and see how we, if we found an IED, they would be watching us all the time. I mean, you would never see them, but they'd be watching you all the time, and they would see exactly how you reacted to an IED or you reacted to a small arms fire, and then they would gather their intel, and then they would counter you. So then we would have to, they would counter us, we would counter them, and it was a cat and mouse game the whole time. And so we were doing patrols for a little bit, and maybe I think it was pretty much about 2 weeks, exactly 2 weeks when we were conducting patrols. I remember we were doing, it was called Operation Street Sweeper. So we had our whole entire company, which was probably, and attachments, maybe about I don't know, I'm going to say just about 150 to 175 Marines that were out conducting patrols in just different areas, but we were all linked in together. So we were out there patrolling, and it was Operation Street Sweeper. And basically we were just going out like online, just going through and looking for weapons caches and looking for the enemy, because when we took over, the Army was in that AO, the area of operation. So they were getting hit like super hard. They were getting hit. So we wanted to show force. So we ended up going out as the entire company. And I remember we took up a small little, like we went in and we're conducting patrols, and we took over a house. And so we asked the Iraqis that lived in there nicely if we can have their house.
They give them to you?
Yeah.
I'll just take my house.
Yeah. He was nice enough to allow us to take his house over and have it serve as a patrol base. So we get into this house, and I remember we were going up, I was with my lieutenant, and I was so tired. I'd just taken off all my gear. And, we set up all the security around, had our avenues of approach all covered. And it was a two-story house. And it was like on the roof, they had, like 5-foot walls that you can, all around surrounding their roofs. And on that roof, they had a small balcony. So I had put my guys on these small balconies that surrounded the roof. And, one of my guys, this was his first deployment to Iraq. His name was Eric Herbert. He was a Lance Corporal, and we're all, I had my Marines in security, had some inside, and he was out on this, on the balcony, and I had just taken my gear off. We called in our paws and everything, and all of a sudden you hear this loud crack, just boom, it was an unbelievably loud crack, and it was a sniper shot. And boy, I tell you what, everybody, you just jumped up, boom, gear went on like in a split second. And I'm running around because I knew it was a sniper, but we just didn't know what direction it was coming from. And I'm running around, and I get all my Marines, and I move them inside of the house, and I'm asking all the Marines if they saw the shot, if they saw the sniper, if they knew the direction that it came, the distance, anything, and nobody had any information about where the shot came from. And I'll tell you, that's like the scariest thing, when you have a sniper out there and they're picking you guys off, it's scary because you don't know if you're going to be the next one in the crosshairs, and you don't know how good they shoot, so I'm running around, and as the platoon sergeant, I'm responsible for all of these guys, and here I am. I was 28 years old, so and at the time we had attachments, so I had about 50 guys that I was responsible for, making sure they were safe. And so I'm running around asking all the questions and everything, and all of a sudden I hear, I'm hit. And I'm sitting there like, who's hit? Who's yelling that? So I look up and I see my Marine, and he's like yelling, I'm hit. So I run upstairs real quick, and I low crawl on the balcony, and the balcony only had like about a 2-foot ledge just all the way around. And I remember I get out, and I'm low crawling to him, and his eyes were like the size of silver dollars. I mean, they were just wide open, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, where are you hit? Asking him, where you hit? And he's like, looking at me, he's pale white, sweating, and he's got Kevlar peppered all over his face. And he's like, I'm shot in the head. And I'm like, shot in the head? Like, if you were shot in the head, you wouldn't be here, right? You'd be dead. So I'm like, all right, let's go. I'm like, come on, follow me. So we low crawl all the way back, and we get into the safety of the roof where it had, the 5-foot walls. So we get in, we take a knee, and we take off his Kevlar, and we're looking at his Kevlar, and we're examining it, and we look and we see that he got shot right in the brim of his helmet, and the round had gone in through the helmet, traveled out and around to the left side of his ear and out of the side of his helmet, and didn't even touch him. And I have no idea how in the world that happened. I have absolutely, if God wasn't watching over him then, man, I tell you, if he wasn't a believer, he became a believer that day, and I asked him, I was like, how did it happen? And he's like, I saw something. There was a canal. There was North Angel roads and South Angel roads, and there was a canal that separated those two roads, and it was an unimproved road, just dirt, and it was real dangerous. A lot of IEDs, a lot of weapons caches, sniper fire, and it wasn't if you got hit, it was when you got hit, and what the severity was, and on the North Angel side, it was the area of operation belonged to the Army, and on the South Angel side, it was our area of operation that belonged to the Marines. So they knew that we couldn't just run across this canal and attack them, so they fired from across the canal. And I asked him, I was like, what'd you see, and he sat there, and he was like, he's like, I saw something shining. So I lifted up my rifle, and we had ACOGs. So he's like, I saw something shiny, and as soon as I lifted up my rifle and I put my head to the side, boom, I got shot in the helmet. And I'm sure he realizes it now, but that split second, if he didn't turn his head to look through that sight, his head would have been in that Kevlar, splattered everywhere, And it
Wow.
was literally like, I don't know if it was a millisecond. It was, I mean, those crosshairs, they were aimed for right between his eyes, because as the second he turned his head, the Kevlar went down with his head, and that's where he got shot. And we were in awe. We were in awe. We never returned fire because we didn't know where the shot came from. We never got shot again after that. So the sniper was out there still on the loose. So he was able, to keep his helmet. He kept it, got a new helmet. Mission still went on, and we continued to push forward, but he wasn't the same after that. He was just, he wasn't the same. I could see it in his eyes. He was 19 years old. He just wasn't the same, and I don't think anybody would be after taking a shot like that to the head, so, we still continued to do our patrols. We still went out there looking for IEDs and weapons caches. We assisted in the Army, helped them out and provided security with them. They had their Bradleys out there, so they would be driving up and down, and we would provide security for them. And a week later, we end up going out on another patrol. But this is where it gets interesting, and this is where my testimony begins. So this is where it gets really, really good. So, well, I guess you would say good, because I'm still here. So we go out, and my platoon was tasked. We would rotate out like a QRF, which was the quick reaction force, and we would provide security for our little camp, our little fob. And we had all the posts, and then after a while we would rotate out and another platoon would move in. But at that time, my platoon was the QRF, so we were responsible for resupplies to our sister platoons that were out, and we were also responsible for providing security to the to the camp, to our little fob. And I was sitting on the fob for a little while, and I was like, man, I really want to go out and get out. I want to get some. It's basically every infantry guy. You want to get some. You don't want to sit on the sidelines. It's like training for the Super Bowl and then sitting on the sidelines. It's like you want to get in the game. So I ended up going out with one of my squad leaders. He had put together the convoy and the route and everything, and we went out and resupplied one of the platoons. And we were talking, and I remember I was talking to his name was Medlicott, and I was talking to him, and I used to call him the fire starter and mess around, because he had like so much of Camp Pendleton on fire with the flare. So I just started calling him the fire starter, and we were talking and sitting there just kind of, just having a good conversation for a little bit. And I remember the lieutenant wanted us to go pick up our sniper team, but my squad leader was like, no, I don't want to do it. Stats aren't, he's like, I knew he's going to ask us, and I don't want to do it. I don't trust it. So I told the lieutenant, I was like, no, we're not going to do it, sir. We got to get back to the fob. It's like, you got to send your guys out to go get them. So we start heading back, and about, before we got back, it was right before, it was maybe a minute or so before we got back to the fob. Boom, IED goes off. And then over the radio, they start saying that their convoy just hit an IED, and it was a catastrophic IED. So it ended up, man, I feel bad. It ended up destroying the Humvee, and they took a route that they shouldn't have. It was a donkey trail route, and they were told not to go down this route. It was like a shortcut to get to the snipers, and they took this shortcut that they shouldn't have. And because they were observed on that route, they had planted a huge IED, and it blew the Humvee to smithereens. There was 3 people in that vehicle, and Medlicott Medlicott was one of them, and it blew him into smithereens, blew him into pieces. The other two got blown out, and they were jacked up physically. Just the wounds that they got they were just jacked up. And we had just gotten back, and we were from resupplying them, and that could have been us, that could have been us. But because I said no, they sent another unit, and that unit is the one that got hit. And I hear it coming over the radio, and I look at the captain. I'm like, sir, let me go. Let me take my Marines. I've got them. I said, we just came back. Our vehicles are ready. We're ready to rock and roll. Said, let me take these Marines and go secure the area. So he said, roger that. So I jumped in the vehicle, and there was 4 of us. I think I had 12 Marines and 2 corpsmen with me. And we leave the FOB, and we're trying to, so this happened at nighttime, and it was about, I'm gonna say if I remember correctly, it was about 11 o'clock or so at night, and we were in a rural area, so it was nothing but farmlands, nothing but canals everywhere. So it was real hard to navigate, especially because we didn't navigate with lights on. We couldn't drive with lights on because we knew that if they had seen us, we were going to get attacked somehow, some way. So we had to drive with our night vision goggles on, and these little IR lights that were like they barely illuminated anything. And we're driving with our night visions all in circles, right? And we could see where the helicopters were landing, and they were doing the CAS evacs, and we could see them. But every time we drove to go towards them, there would be a canal. So then we would have to navigate around the canal, and then we couldn't locate them. We couldn't find them. We kept telling them, hey, pop flares, and they pop flares, like, all right, let's go this way. Boom, turns out to be, a dead end or something, or, something always came up to where we could not find them. Finally, I get out of the vehicle. And I had my Marines get out, and they provide security. I get out, I take one of my squad leaders, and we're walking, and we finally find this small trail. I mean, you literally had to find it on foot. You wouldn't find it driving. And we just happened to go down the trail, and it was the donkey trail that they had gone down. So I went and I walked for a little bit. We found them, so I called the convoy over. We secured the area, and I got some intel. They were like, "Hey, they told me exactly what was happening, and they told me, hey, you know what? We've got 2 vehicles that got separated from our convoy. You need to go out there and link up with them and come back so we could secure the area with all the vehicles." So I was like, "Okay, roger that." It's like, let's go. So we jumped back in the vehicles. And at this time, I was in the last vehicle. So we had 4 vehicles, and I was in the 4th vehicle. So we're driving around, and we hit where one of the crossroads. We hit one of the crossroads, and we start looking around. Right, we're looking around for the vehicles. All the Marines are looking, but we couldn't find them. And we're just driving. I'm telling them, hey, keep your eyes open for the Humvees. I heard that one of them was tipped over and that there were Marines injured, and I had the corpsmen. So we're driving, we're looking, and here we go on South Angels Road, and we're driving, and it's a dirt road, so real easy for IEDs. I mean, the intel that we had, there was a ton of IEDs just all throughout, And so we get on this road, and we're driving, and we turn off all the lights, and we're driving, and it's pitch black. And we're going, and we can't find the vehicles. So I'm not, and I couldn't get on the radio because everybody was on the net doing the evacs, and the captain, everybody was, sit reps, everything. I couldn't get on the net. So I told my Marines, I'm like, hey, we're going to keep driving, and we're going to look for these vehicles. We're going to link up with these vehicles, and we're getting out of here. We're getting out of Dodge, man. So we're driving, and we're going super, super slow. and we're driving, and we come across wires that are running across the berm. And so the convoy stops, and my Marines get out, and they're like, "Hey, Staff Sergeant, there's some wires, you know." So I get out, I start looking, and we follow the wires, and it just ended up, it was nothing. It just went to like a water pump or whatever. So just to be safe, we cut the wires and we pushed the wires to the side. And at that time, I was like, okay, you know what? I look at my squad leader. I'm like, "Hey, you got any room in the front in the lead Vic?" He's like, "Yeah, Staff Sergeant, we got one seat left." And I'm like, "All right." I said, "I'm gonna go with you guys in the front, and that way I could be in the front, and you know, pretty much start navigating our way through." And so we start driving, and we get a call from the snipers. They're like, "Hey, we just see a convoy that just passed our location." And we're like, "Oh damn, we're pretty far out, you know, we're pretty far out." So we start driving, and I see, you know, we never found the vehicles, and we were too far out. So I told my Marines, I'm like, "Hey, the next area that we can find that's big enough to turn our convoy around, we're going to turn the convoy around, and we're going to get out of here as fast as we can. So we're going to turn the lights on, and we're driving out of here," because it was basically uncharted territory. We hadn't patrolled out in that area. We hadn't secured it, nothing. And as we started driving, I see an area probably about 75 yards, right? And I have my driver. I got my driver who's a PFC. He was for his first deployment. My squad leader that was up in the front, my radio operator who was the one that got shot the week before, and a turret gunner that was in the turret, and then myself. So I was sitting in the back seat of right behind the driver. And I look over, and I see a nice area that's about 75 yards that we can finally turn all the vehicles around and get out, right? So I'm like, I lean forward. I grab my driver, and I'm like, "Hey," I'm like, "you see that spot right there?" He's like, "Yes, Staff Sergeant." You know, little accent, you know, country boy. And I'm like, "Right there, we're going to go. We're going to turn around." I said, "And we're going to get out of here." I said, "But if you get me blown up," I said, "I swear to God, man, I'm gonna beat you." In different words, but that's what I'm gonna say. So